Understanding your fear system. This presentation will help you understand how your fear system works. So you may be wondering, why is this important to my intuition? Well, the truth is, fear can get in our way, and it can also be an important warning system for us. So discernment can be incredibly important, so we know when to listen to our fear and when to walk through it. Keep in mind that whether you're really in danger or not, your body responds to fear the same way. And fear has a way of taking over our minds and our bodies. Personally, I found it really helpful to understand the mechanisms of fear. That helps me drop judgment about my fear and understand how to use my parasympathetic nervous system to create balance in my life. Balance to support my mental and physical health and to help me be mindful. The deeper we understand our bodies, the deeper we can go with our spiritual and intuitive life. Everything that our body does is purposeful. Our body is a tool for awareness, and to master it, we need to understand it as fully as possible. So I've broken this presentation into two parts just so that it doesn't get so long. So this first one is really about understanding how your fear system works. And then we're going to move on to the second one, which is more about how to manage your fear system and also brings in the other part of the fear system, the thinking part, which is your worry brain. So we'll learn more about that in that next presentation. So to understand the fear system, we really have to go into the limbic brain. And you see I've got two diagrams up here to help you understand this. And where we're going to start is looking in the inner brain here with the amygdala and the hypothalamus. So you can see the amygdala is actually two almond-shaped lobes in the middle of your brain. And your amygdala is responsible for memory. And one of the things that it does actually is hold on to negative memories. And it's also responsible for setting off your fear system. So one of the interesting things about the amygdala is it's hooked into all of your senses, and it is constantly on alert for danger. So it's constantly looking for signals that indicate that you might be in danger, and it does that by monitoring your senses as information comes in. And because it holds on to negative memory, it also monitors for those things that cause danger to you in the past. And so one of the things that can happen with the amygdala because of that is that if something happened to you and it happened through the occurrence of something that is normally not dangerous to you, you might go into hyper alert or arousal when that thing is around. So for example, let's just imagine that you got into an accident and that it was a red car that hit you and you had an injury from that. Now, of course, consciously, you might not remember the detail that the car that hit you was red. You could, but you might not. After the incident is over, in the future, when you see a red car, your amygdala might very well set off your fear response. And you may not understand why that's happening. You know, it's just a red car, right? Or you may not even realize that it's the red car. So let's talk about what actually happens when your fear or stress response system goes off. So for this, we're going to look at this diagram over here. Okay, so when the amygdala goes on alert and senses danger, what it does is it contacts the hypothalamus, which we saw is sitting right next to it. And the hypothalamus starts to send off some hormones and ways to notify different parts of your body, like the pituitary gland and the adrenal glands, which actually sit right above your kidneys. And so what this sets in motion is sending out all of these hormones that actually shift your body. So those hormones are norepinephrine, adrenaline, and cortisol. And so, of course, adrenaline raises your heart rate and your breathing. And the cortisol actually is going to ensure that your blood flow goes to your limbs and your muscles so that you can escape or fight back from whatever the danger is. And one of the interesting things about the function of cortisol is that it also shuts down your thinking brain. So your thinking brain is right up here in your prefrontal cortex. And cortisol actually works to shut that down when the fear response goes off. Now, I think that's kind of fascinating because I think what happens is we get very critical of ourselves for not being able to think when we feel that we're in danger. And so we can be in danger socially or we can be in danger physically, and the same thing's going to happen. So, for instance, one of the greatest fears is public speaking. And if you have that fear and maybe you had to public speak in the past, you may have noticed that you got up on stage and all of a sudden you couldn't think anymore. And that's because your fear system went off and it actually shut down your thinking brain. It's not that something's wrong with you, that's your normal body response. And so that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to bring this in here, is because I want to help you take judgment off of when your fear response goes off. So let's see what happens when our stress response system, our fear response system goes off. So for instance, we see this picture of a cheetah who's chasing down and catching an antelope. So in order to escape, this antelope needs the fear system to go off so that it gets a burst of speed and it can run away or maybe even fight back. And so that's actually what the fight or flight system helps us do. It helps us survive. So it has a primary purpose in our life. But there's actually more to it than that. So we often hear about the fight or flight system. What we don't often hear about is the freeze system. And I want to talk about that a little bit more as well, because this is important to understand also. So what you see here is a diagram of polyvagal theory by a man named Stephen Porges. And it's all about your autonomic nervous system, or what we could call the ANS. So the autonomic nervous system is responsible for certain body functions. And so there's two parts to the autonomic nervous system. There's the sympathetic nervous system, and there's the parasympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system, you can see here, is actually broken down into two parts. So let's talk about what the sympathetic nervous system is, because this is where your fear response goes off. This is where the fight or flight comes in. So the sympathetic nervous system is all about hyperarousal. And of course, we might be using the sympathetic nervous system too when we're getting activated, when we're doing exercise and that sort of thing. But the sympathetic nervous system is what comes into play when the fight or flight goes off. And with it, we get the increased heart rate, and we can have dissociated rage or panic as well. So it's our aggressive defense system. Think angry mother bear when you think about this, about the aggressive defense system. That mother bear is going to fight, be angry if she feels that her cubs are threatened. So that's a sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. Now the parasympathetic nervous system, this is the one that we can utilize to bring in calm, but there's actually two parts to it. And this is what this man, Stephen Porges, discovered. So the primary nerve that's involved in the parasympathetic nervous system is called the vagus nerve. And there's actually two parts to that nerve. So you see there's the ventral vagal and the dorsal vagal. Now, the ventral vagal is the more sophisticated part of this nerve. This part of the parasympathetic nervous system is engaged when we're in optimal arousal, optimal resting arousal and function. And so this nerve is connected into all of our social muscles in our face and our hearing and our voice. And it's also what's engaged when we're at rest but alert. And it also has some functions around digestion. Okay, so we call this the social engagement system of the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is where we want to be most of the time. You know, we need to be aroused and be able to fight or fight back, flee, exactly, or fight back if we need to. And we may want to engage our sympathetic nervous system when we're ramping up to do some exercise and that sort of thing. But most of the time, we want to be here. Now, of course, the dorsal part of the vagal system is when there's extreme threat and we can't get away. So this is a part of our nervous system that actually totally shuts us down. You might say that this is the part of the nervous system that sends us into shock. So you notice it's the same nerve, but a different portion of that nerve. And so there are times when the only thing that we can do in a life-threatening situation is freeze. So think babies who are in danger. They don't have the option of fleeing or fighting back. The only thing that they can do is freeze. And so what we see is a very decreased heart rate and that withdrawal that comes with shock, which looks like this. You see this possum here. And the value of this is that it actually may cause a predator to overlook us or lose interest because they think that we're already dead. So that's why the possum does what the possum does. It goes into this freeze response, and maybe if there's a predator there that's interested in eating it, it will lose interest and go away. And so this is another important part of our nervous system and could potentially also save our life. With humans, however, we run into an additional problem with this because even though the body is in freeze, that fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system has been activated, and all of that energy gets frozen inside the body. Now, with animals, what typically happens after the danger is over, if they survive, they're going to shake that energy off. So if you ever notice a deer on alert, how they freeze for a moment when they sense danger, so they go perfectly still. And if the danger goes away, or they realize that there's not danger there, what'll happen is you'll start to see their skin start to shiver and shake. What they're doing is actually running off that energy from the fight or flight. As humans, what we do is override that. And that can actually set us up for anxiety later. So sometimes people, when they have anxiety, what happened is they had this freeze response at some point in their life. Maybe it was an operation when they were a very young child, and the only response that they had available to them at that time was to freeze and go into a kind of shock. Later, something could trigger that memory, and the memory may not be cognitive, but the body remembers, and so starts to have anxiety. And so the resolution to this is not just talk therapy or drugs. There are some wonderful practitioners out there now that are doing somatic therapy. So Stephen Levine is one. He wrote the book Waking the Tiger. So if you're interested in finding out more about this, that's an excellent book to read. So I'm hoping this gives you a bigger understanding of how your fear system works. And I'm hoping that it helps you go into more of a state of non judgment. So I'm going to end this presentation here. And when you're ready, you can pick up on the next presentation, which is all about managing your fear system.